As other critics of GCRF have noted, GCRF emerged out of austerity politics and was one way of using a reduced pot of money to both demonstrate enhanced support for the UK research community and meet aid commitments and obligations. And while some of the language was updated, the GCRF still tends to reproduce colonialist discourse that as a developed country, the UK is a centre of advanced knowledge production that can and must be used to solve the problems of impoverished and less developed people elsewhere. And at the same time, though, GCRF not only foregrounded the commitment or a commitment to equitable partnership building and collaboration as a key principle of international research practice. And so it opened up a space for bringing more global perspectives and dialogues together. But it also opened up and put in place funding arrangements that enabled international co-investigators and institutions to benefit materially and participate more equitably as partners in research. So, good and bad going on there. And the latter was for us the most important of the reasons for putting together the GlobalGRACE project. And we used that as a way to open up and gently subvert and critically extend GCRF, the funding call and the remit of GCRF, so that we could build in that global perspective and bring together and foreground diverse global perspectives, knowledges and practices, and at least attempt to avoid, to paraphrase Audre Lorde, being the tools of the white colonial master's house. So how did we go about putting together this global perspective and global partnership? So put simply, we approached potential partners, including both people and organisations we'd known for a long time, and those with whom we were newly acquainted. And we invited them to describe and define a project that they would like to do, building on their own knowledge and expertise and their own good practice. Our only requirement was that the projects proposed should address the themes of gender well-being and cultures of equality. And in so doing, we invited them to address and respond to the themes in ways that were meaningful and significant to them and the situations that they faced and encountered on a daily basis, and to share and exchange ideas and practices constructively and creatively with partners across the project, across the world. So right from the beginning, that global perspective was critical. So as I've said, the consortium is international. It's comprised of 14 partner organisations in 6 countries. We have a core team of about 35 people sited across partners, and that includes academic co-investigators, researchers based in NGO partner organisations, and 6 early career researchers, 5 of whom are from the Global South and based in partner universities. So the vast majority of the GlobalGRACE team are of and from partner countries, working with their own situated knowledges and experiences. And working together, we've cultivated partnerships and grown capability through our international consortium that emphasises the importance of both South-South networks and conversations as much as North-South networks and conversations, and South-North network and conversations. So we've built capacity strengthening for everyone who's part of the teams, the academic leads, the early career researchers and the NGO staff into the project structure. First, through an iterative series of capability events or capacity building events, convened by and organised around the needs and expertise of our partners and participants in each locale. It's expensive and there are environmental costs, but global pandemics aside, there's really no substitute for intensive, substantial face-to-face working encounters in those different locales around the world, so that everybody gets to share the sights, smells and sounds and place and space of one another. And we've also built these kind of competencies and capabilities through a structured programme of cross-country mobility for research training and NGO networking, so that partners could meet each other, visit each other and spend time with each other across their countries. And thirdly, through research mentoring that pairs more and less experienced researchers across the consortium. So thinking about what we've been actually doing in each of these kind of projects, to give a bit of an overview, We collaboratively prepared the 6 work packages led by the academic investigators and partner universities with the early career researchers and NGO researchers. Each of the work packages develops and deploys creative and cultural practices to investigate and challenge systems of privilege and to try and create more equitable conditions and enhance the health and welfare of particular groups of marginalised peoples in each of the locations. And in doing so, they build on and extend critically and creatively work that many of them were already engaged in as academics, NGOs and practitioners through arts-based and creative organisations in these contexts. So GlobalGRACE has provided a resource, which is obviously critically important, and it's created a platform, but it's really helping to grow work that was already there, to really highlight good practice already there, but then embark on new adventures and enhance capability and strengthen creative capacity by putting their work into critical conversation and exchange with the work of others in different situations across the world to find linkages and resonance. And embedded within the projects has been the explicit aim to create a safe space for participants to come together and through various creative means to recognise their value, agency and skills in a context that's often marked by everyday gender-based violence, discrimination and social injustice. So with this forming the kind of backdrop, the context of what we've been trying to do, I'll briefly give you a few highlights of each of the work packages. So the first set of work packages partners groups in South Africa and Bangladesh and focuses on women and labour in context of precarity. So in South Africa, we're working with gender and theatre colleagues Sarah Matchett and Yuliwe Clark and researcher Phoebe Kasubi at the University of Cape Town, and with various colleagues at the NGO partner SWEAT, the Sex Workers Education and Advocacy Task Force in Cape Town. And the project explores participatory theatre with and by sex workers. And as with all of the work packages, art and performance are simultaneously acts of aesthetic creation, modes of inquiry, and forms of intervention that politically challenge police brutality and sexual violence and engage wider publics in debate, raise aspirations and self-confidence of the women who are undertaking sex work along the way. Our aims throughout this project were to provide resource to strengthen capacity amongst the group of sex worker participants, mainly women, to support them in creative and practical transferable skills development, and to create a space and platform for them to explore issues around gender-based violence and well-being, their own well-being, with psychosocial support built in from the beginning, and to raise awareness of their rights and the lives of sex workers in South Africa more broadly through theatre. And one concrete output of the work package has been the establishment of the Independent Sex Workers Theatre Group, or SW Theatre Group, led and run by participants. So the SW Theatre Group has already staged a number of physical, live-streamed and serialised performances. And beyond the project cycle, we've fronted the rental costs for a theatre space for the next 3 years. And our South African partner NGO SWEAT will continue to provide a stable base for the theatre company into the future. So trying to build in some sustainability there. The second kind of partner package is in Bangladesh, in northern Bangladesh. We're working with project lead Dr. Tanzina Chowdhury at Shah Jalal University in Silic, with locally based researchers Orvi, Nazmul Cake and Pushpa Begum and Joy in the NGO IDEA, the Institute for Development Affairs. And our research participants here are a group of resource poor women who work as construction labourers on building sites to earn a living. So Tanzina and I have been working together for over a decade actually in northern Bangladesh, working with female construction workers. And in joining with the NGO IDEA, GlobalGRACE was again building on strong foundations and showcasing equalities work being done in Bangladesh and bringing that global perspective to sustainable development goals. And the women participants challenge normative gender codes in Bangladesh pertaining to women's appropriate roles, employment and public visibility. As we've argued elsewhere, Tanzina and I, Female construction workers challenged dominant ideas about women's bodily strength and skills, digging foundations, breaking rocks, carrying heavy loads. They're highly visible performers of masculinized labour in the public arena, and their bodies blur the borders of normative constructions of appropriate femininity and masculinity. They stand at the front line of patriarchy, queering the margins of male space, and the radical potential of these border bodies must be recognised. However, through their construction labour, these women can experience and do experience significant health harms, poor mental well-being, labour exploitation, gender-based discrimination, violence and sexual abuse. So this project explores how collaborative film and participatory photography, led and curated by women construction workers, can be used by them to show and tell their stories in their own ways, as well as generate public awareness of their lives, make visible their everyday struggles and achievements, making inroads into an occupation normatively gendered as masculine. So to give a bit more information about this particular one, so the silic-based research team has been working closely with a group of around 12 to 15 construction worker women for over 3 years now. More recently, over the past year, they've expanded to over 50 female participants in workshops, and they've also now developed a social enterprise through Facebook, which has over 1,000 local women involved to generate different forms of survival strategies as the construction sites close down because of the pandemic. So they hold weekly workshops, spend the day together. They've been supported and trained in mobile phone-based film and photography. They hold creative material culture and craft workshops, and the workshops are importantly a safe space where women can build friendships and support networks, talk about themselves, their lives, share experiences, and it's become a really important source of support over the past several years, not least because of the pandemic. And they've also developed wider skills in event planning, coordination, budgeting, publicity. They organised a huge showcase of their films and photography in a large community festival. And as with all the Global Grace research, we're trying to bring kind of a feminist, decolonial and participatory methodological approach and creative practice to the work. Our approach is one that takes seriously the position of female participants as situated knowers, a concept that's important, as you know, within feminist epistemology. And it's through this lens that we understand gendered beings as knowers situated in relation to what is known and experienced by both themselves and in relation to other knowers. We understand that what is known and the way that it is known reflects the situation or perspective of the knower, and that this itself is legitimate and valuable knowledge. So in line with our feminist approach, we're also concerned to acknowledge and understand, but also attempt to mitigate the power imbalances between researchers and participants, beginning with the experience and standpoint of women with whom we're working, and again bringing a global and locally contextual perspective to addressing sustainable development, just as the Ni3 project has been doing. Over the last several months of working sort of slowly, over more than several months of working slowly together with the support of the team, the women participants decided how they wanted to make films and the visual photographic exhibition, what images and narratives they wanted to portray about their lives and communities and families. They also started talking more and more about labour rights and their own needs. And through that, they decided to create their own workers' manifesto of labour rights for construction workers and female construction workers particularly. Another example of bringing global and locally contextual perspectives to the SDGs. And the participants launched and exhibited a workers' manifesto at a film and photography exhibition and a community festival in February 2020 with all the family and friends, which was brilliant. I was fortunate to be there just before the pandemic hit. That was my daughter trying to contact me. Sorry, that's where I was at. So they also then toured the exhibition, again pre-lockdown, or just at the point really. They toured it to Kolkata, and they liaised with some Indian women construction workers that you can see here. They weren't able to go on tour to Dhaka, Manila and Cape Town as planned, but what they did do was then create a really great digital exhibition that you can access through the GlobalGRACE website. So key to this process is the principle that participants take control of the process and decide what is portrayed, how the films are edited, how those photographs are displayed, and what narratives accompany the images. Looking now quickly to Brazil, just a couple more minutes of your time. So the second pair of work packages focuses on masculinities, gender and sexual identities. So in Brazil, we've investigated how cultural and artistic practices, including dance and artistic practice through arts, poetry, music and painting, can work with young men, particularly within a favela in Rio, some sort of marginal masculinities, if you like, to enable different ways of thinking and doing positive masculinity. So we're working with researchers at the Pontifical University in Rio and the NGOs Promundo, IMJA and the Observatorio Favelas in a community called Bela Maré in Rio. GlobalGRACE Brazil has had a number of interlocking foci, mapping and creating networks between community-based arts and other organisations, focused on supporting positive masculinity, challenging forms of racial and gender-based violence and marginalisation, initiating a series of arts and dance workshops and residences that provide platforms for creative work and artistic outputs of people whose lives and livelihoods as artists are constrained and restricted by what researcher Andrea Gil refers to as grossly unequal concentration of cultural and artistic equipment in the centres and middle class areas of the city, and whose gatekeepers, more often than not white men, tend to operate through exclusive personal networks, privileging those who circulate in shared spaces of social professional association. So that through artistic residences, there are forms of inquiry that lead to production and showcasing of aesthetic work and accomplishment, but also feed into community-based learning toolkits through which to reflect on and address forms of intersecting gender equalities and articulate alternative forms of masculinity. And just like kind of remembering that the first time that we went to visit and spend time at the Partnership and Capability event in Bela Maré in Brazil, the day before we went to meet participants, 8 young men were shot dead by police helicopter in the assumption that they were drugs and gang kind of members. These were the young men that we were working with. In the Philippines, the project team is led by researchers at the University of the Philippines and working with NGO Wangsia Rinali in San Pablo, which is a more rural community further south of the capital. And they've convened a series of national and community-based creative writing workshops and events with LGBTQ identified young people and with more established LGBTQ identified creative writers from across the Philippines. And the project explores how creative writing, poetry, short story writing, life writing, various forms of textual, visual and spoken word and performance can be used firstly to create a platform for aspiring LGBTQ writers and challenge the heteronormative conventions that foreclose their aesthetic practice. And secondly, and through that, the writing process and outputs are also a means to disclose discrimination and stigma faced by LGBTQ young people and create opportunities for mobilising such practices to enable a shift from public cultures of tolerance to that of rights and recognition. The workshops already led to a number of creative outputs, including collaborative publications from the community national workshops, 2 anthologies of queer poetry and literature arising from these workshops, and also we're developing now an LGBTQ national curriculum to support the teaching of creative writing across the Philippine country's national curriculum in secondary schools and colleges. And the third set of work packages looks at curatorial practices, one in Mexico, working in Chiapas with the University of Chiapas and the NGO Voces Mesoamericanas. And this is drawing on and extends the work of the Itinerant Museum of Migration, the Museo Migrante, and it uses images and objects produced by indigenous migrant women, men and young people to strengthen their self-organising initiatives in the face of displacement, disappearance and detention. And here we're working through participatory filmmaking, photography, shadow theatre, and also pop-up museums in the streets of the towns and villages that are curated by Indigenous communities to bring their experiences and views of the world to a wider public. As project lead Pavel Valenzuela Aramburu has recently written about and described it, the scenery of Mumi's set is a movable nomadic space that evolves through dialogue and live exchange with migrant communities. And the quote there on the slide is from Dayanira, who is and Aldo, who are key researchers working there. So Mumi uses various pedagogical and communicative resources that encourage links to be made between artistic cultural expressions and political reflection. And it's particularly concerned with listening to the voices and enhancing the participation of Indigenous youth. The majority of workshop participants are young Indigenous people from the Torchul community in Chiapas Highlands of Chiapas. So art is the agent here that generates political aesthetics, emerging from the context, knowledge and experience of the participants and the audiences. And the final work package, we felt that it was important to locate one research project in the UK as a way of making a stand to say that inequalities are not confined to the global south, of course. We need to interrogate the UK under the same rubric of so-called development that is applied so readily to other countries in often depoliticised ways. So this final work package is divided into two parts. The first works across the UK and South Africa, working with groups and museums, groups and organisations seeking to change and challenge museum practices to decolonise museums. And it's led by researchers based at Goldsmiths, but it considers the changing nature of organisation and curatorial practice in relation to intersectional gender differences in post-colonial contexts. And it's focused on power and control in the museum and exhibition sector in the UK and South Africa, asking who gets to run the museum and the gallery spaces, who gets to exhibit in these spaces, who does not, what and who do we get to see in the spaces, and how is difference made and displayed. And as part of this work package then, Shivol mcguirk here, our researcher based in the UK, is focusing on the process of co-curation of international exhibition. So this was the first one that was co-curated in 2018. We have just launched the second one, the second co-curated one here actually on Wednesday. So it's about working cross-collaborative across international partnerships to think about how we portray, project and discuss and debate gender well-being and equalities and creative activism and creative practice and decolonial approaches to development through exhibition. Here's a quote from Siobhan. In thinking and planning together about what this exhibition will be or would be, we've continuously been looking for ways to foreground the process of connection and exchange that goes back to the very inception of the project in terms of partnership building and collaboration. We're concerned with attending to and ensuring that our practices of display and exhibition and representation more broadly challenge and confront the persistent legacies of the colonial gaze and their institutionalised practices in museums, but also in conventions and hierarchies of academia and academic publishing. So this sets out in broad strokes some of the work that we've been doing to bring a global perspective to the Sustainable Development Goals 5 and 3. And in summary, the legacy of Global Grace is to highlight the importance of, and not least what can be achieved through doing that work of bringing the global diverse perspective, diverse knowledges, diverse ways of seeing and being to Sustainable Development Goals. We've been trying to do development differently in a way, from a decolonial perspective, to try and see arts and humanities as central to those processes of exchange and revelation. And it's really important in all of this process to think about the challenges and possibilities for finding more equitable ways of working together within and across our different positionalities, our different territories, our spaces, our places, to experiment with ideas and to see how we can translate complex social research into creative engagement that speaks to one another without losing meaning through translation. So ultimately we return to Audre Lorde. If we are to genuinely address any sustainable development goal, doing so from diverse global perspectives is fundamental. So, thank you.